Give me a second, going live now. I believe we are live. So hello world. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Monica Kang from InnovatorsBox. I am very excited to welcome you here for another episode of Creativity Show. Today you are in for another treat. We're continuing on the theme of reimagining the past few weeks. And sure, indeed, we talked about how you reimagine, whether it's community gatherings, youth empowerment at school, and the workplace, and even perfume making up until last week. Well, I know another area that we often think a lot about is tech space. I mean, many of you are probably entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs. You probably attend a lot of tech events, accelerator programs, apply for them, boot camps, and hackathons that you either run or participate. And if you really think about it, that is a whole realm of events that we usually rely in person. So how in the world is our innovators and community leaders bringing this online? I have a ton of questions, and I'm sure you have some questions that we'll love to dive in. And so I invited two special guests who happen to be based in Boston working on these and have shifted very thoughtfully in serving their community. So with that being said, we'd love to see if we have our speakers. Jen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Hi. Oh, and okay. So a little bit about me. My name is Jen Riedel. I am currently the program manager for Techstars Boston. If you've never heard of Techstars is the global platform for investment and innovation. And the Techstars Boston program is a 13-week mentorship-driven accelerator program. And we've certainly gone through and considered what it's like to go from an in-person program to virtual program. We'll talk more about that. Previous to being in this role, I was the regional manager for Techstars startup programs, which are programs like the Techstars Startup Weekend and Startup Week. And these are programs that are really geared towards bringing entrepreneurs into the fold who may not have ever had any experience with entrepreneurship before, to do a 3-day learning by doing session over a weekend. And then beyond that, I am a longtime sort of fan of all things startups. I've worked for several companies in the earlier stages of operations, been in sort of a service design thinking roles, facilitated for a lot of these styles of programs, and have done community building work with organizations like the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers, Ladies Wine and Design, which is something that got started out of a design firm in New York that's gone global, and some other programs like Starting Block, as far as being a fellow and a mentor. So really enjoy community building across the board for all types of innovators, entrepreneurs, and designers alike.
Hi there, I'm Leo Guyshan. I'm the Associate Director for Network Engagement at the Harvard Innovation Labs. So a little bit about me, I focus on, at the Innovation Lab, I focus on building and connecting our wide network of value creators, so experts, specialists, VCs, and other community and ecosystem support mechanisms into our venture creators, our entrepreneurs, our innovators. And then prior to joining the Harvard iLab, I was I was at Mass Challenge, focused on building a program and supporting about 128 entrepreneurs here in Boston every year. And even before that, I've sort of been a part of different sort of tech and startup ecosystems. I've operated a social impact startup, and I've done a lot of great kind of work in the entrepreneurship innovation space. And then just a little bit about the iLab for those of you that don't know. The Harvard Innovation Labs is a cross-university initiative. So we serve all 13 schools at Harvard, and we help innovators and venture creators and entrepreneurs build businesses, sustain them, and grow and get to where they're going further and faster.
So with that being said, as you can see, I am super pumped about this Neely conversation. I'm sure all of you were just listening about Jen and Leo's work. we're probably impressed to think about, man, that's like a lot of events that I probably attend or have participated or read about. And so how timely is it? Because now we have both of them here. You're probably seeing the three of us and really getting a chance to ask some deeper questions, because it's one thing for them to say about what they've been doing pre-COVID, but as we all know, life is a little different right now. And so we want to dive right in. And so some first questions, we're already getting a question from Grant. Thank you for the questions that you've raised already. One question we're already getting from Grant that I want to start with is like, what are ways that we're taking otherwise large groups at one and creating smaller groups more frequently? And I can envision this happening, I mean, for both of you. I'll be curious to think a little bit about, is there specific programs where you had to reshift how you bring larger audiences? I mean, even for startup weekend at Techstars, I'm thinking about, usually we have about 100 plus participants. Like, I feel like that's a little different online, or how you might even run or even think about, should we aim for 100 plus or even something smaller? So be curious to hear, I mean, Leo, for you as well, because you have a large stakeholder. How are you thinking about the audience group and how you monitor and, you know, empower them online? That's different from in person. Whoever would like to start?
Jen, would you like me to go first?
Go for it.
Okay.
And then I'll add more.
Perfect. Just quick background. So in sort of early to mid-March, we were like pre-COVID, a space that was like very, very focused on sort of like the serendipity and sort of the in-person sort of engagement that sort of being part of like a university and being part of like an incubator accelerator space really like relies on. And so when we went virtual sort of in the middle of March, that was a huge learning moment for us, right? Because I think so much of our reliance on sort of physical interaction and physical space kind of went away. And so we had to sort of say quickly, like, how do we maintain what we're doing, but also kind of learn and grow from that? So that's kind of the quick background. And then I think we've done sort of both things, right? We've sort of doubled down on one-to-one interaction. And then we've also focused on sort of bigger, sort of larger events. So a couple of things that we've done sort of on the larger side quickly have been more intentional work with sort of our entire pool of students and pool of venture programs in our accelerator program. So in that case, what we've done is sort of break folks out by industries, specific interest areas, and give them an opportunity to interact with each other. That's been sort of on the larger scale. Another thing we've done on the larger scale has sort of been our President's Innovation Challenge, which went completely 100% remote. And we built a really, really interesting interaction with like live audience feedback, live pitches throughout the course of the event. So when we think about sort of both large and small events, like what are the connections that we're hoping to get? So are we trying to focus on like one-to-one interaction where like entrepreneurs or other sort of stakeholders are interacting with each other? Or are we focused on like the one-to-many where sort of we're showcasing an idea or showcasing like a large sort of concept to a broader audience? And in both ways, we sort of started to think about sort of what do we hope to achieve with each of those things. So I'll quickly kind of stop there. I think I answered most of the question, but Jen, do you want to give your thoughts?
I just want to piggyback on that, because I think one thing that you alluded to, which is really important to highlight, is just really the intention of the why, Leo, that you've highlighted, which I appreciate, right? The reasoning of, it's not just thinking about large and small events. Like, who is it for? Are you trying to create the one-on-one experience, or is it one for the many? And I think that's something that I noticed, that there were some communities who were doing thoughtfully, and those were just like, no, it's one too many. But you're absolutely right. It's not the case. And Jen, I know that's exactly the question you think a lot about, because you actually serve in both cases too. How do you make the decision, and how is that shaping now the online experience and how you create for them?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And I'd also like underline intentionality. I think it becomes that much more important because everything has gone virtual, right? You're not competing necessarily for attention in a in-person and virtual world. Everything is virtual first, and there's a lot going on. And so if you can be intentional about how you set up events, whether it's the one-to-many or the few that are getting together, that goes a long way. And a couple of examples that I have on the one-to-many and then on the like smaller side would be we had a virtual demo day experience back in late April, and we had intended for that event to be in person, and we know how to do that well. And all of a sudden we had about a month to turn it around and say, okay, we need to repackage this, rethink about it, but also consider our audience, which is, founders, investors, mentors, people from all over the world, but who all have lower attention spans, right? Like Zoom fatigue is real. We're not going to be able to capture people's attention for 3 hours like we would have if we were together in a physical room. And so one of the things that we did, our number one goal for that session was we wanted people who were in the room to be able to connect with the founders that were presenting. So we made sure during that hour-long experience that we gave 6 or more opportunities for people to stop paying attention to us and actually go to the specific website and connect right then and there with those founders. And we had an incredible success with that. So that was great. We also did some, it's also about bringing joy to people's lives. So doing funny things like leveraging tools like Cameo to invite celebrities to your events, or something that's going to be sort of catchy and funny and like unexpected can go a long way. So that's one on the one-to-many side. And then I would also say we have Techstars has chapters programs for all of our alumni. And so those programs are run by a board of alumni for our alumni that have gone through our accelerator programs around the globe. And they recently leaned into the fact that now we're global. So we can connect with our counterparts on the East Coast or across the Atlantic Ocean. And so one of the things that I found was really fun and participated in was an event that they put together where New York, Atlanta, Boston, the Eastern Seaboard, Philadelphia, all got together, and we were able to meet in smaller groups and given some questions to lead us to interact with each other in a meaningful way. But it was really refreshing because we were going beyond the borders of Boston, which we usually would be confined to for a networking event of that kind. So I think about being creative as far as how do you leverage the global reach you now have online? And again, going back to the intentionality piece, what is your ultimate goal coming out of these sessions for those that are participating on both sides of the screen, right?
I love, Jen, that you shared that, because at the end of the day, even with this show, if we wanted to have these lovely two folks, I have to be in Boston. And so I'm in DC. In fact, one of us are traveling as well. And so we're all actually in 3 different locations. And for all of you around the world to join us live and be able to rewatch this, it's, again, the power of the virtual aspects. And so, Jen, to piggyback on that, Leo, I know with your work focus, you yourself had to think a lot about the network you're building and manage. I'm curious, what are some changes that you're both excited about that happened during COVID that you didn't expect, especially as a network community builder, and also things that you're anticipating even more, I think, with now this longevity of situation happening in COVID?
Yeah, I'll say kind of 3 things that are sort of really at the top of my mind, and they kind of echo some of what I think Jen said. Is so our opportunity to engage like such a wider audience is so much more so much easier now, and part of that I think is because people are craving connection and want to kind of continue to build on that. I think like Zoom fatigue is a real thing, but I think the other side of that coin is that people like want to do this and like want to feel connected in a moment where we're kind of all feeling increasingly isolated in some ways. And so with that, like when we've done events, like sort of like when we talked about one-to-many events, we've been able to like engage an audience across like pretty much every single continent except Antarctica. Like those moments are really special. And then when you build that when you want to build a network, there are opportunities to sort of engage alumni and other folks all over the world is so much easier because first of all, people want to pitch in and frequently don't have the opportunity because it's limited to geography. But then also now that's like sort of out the window. And so for us, it's much more about sort of like building that intentionality around like who's connecting to whom and how are they connecting, and thinking about like as we're building these networks for our teams and as they're building their own networks, making sure that like we can sort of sustain that kind of momentum and growth sort of beyond just this moment into the future.
so powerful, and really the reminder of going back to the keyword intentionality. I feel like that's going to be a keyword in our conversation today, because without that intentionality, I think, what Leo, you're sharing is that the technical piece is there, but without intentionality, even if you brought 100 people, how are they actually going to connect? What are they going to talk about? And I think that's something at InnovatorsBox we think a lot about, which is why many of you, and Grant included, and Jen, actually yourself as well, was able to participate in some of our innovators meetups where we brought together 100 plus people around the world, from 30 plus countries, many of them that never met, and talking about vulnerable conversations such as, man, I don't know how to get over failure. Like, I've never spoken to a stranger in like the past 4 months since I've been quarantined. And there's something powerful about, I think, navigating that and creating that. But I want to flip the coin a little bit, because one thing as a community leader, if I can be honest, is also the beauty of creating these spaces. But let's be honest, you're also human beings. You also get tired. I'll admit it too. I mean, I have to be adamant about making space for myself, so that way it's not in the process of giving that I am, able to process my mental health. And so I'm curious, genuinely, for the both of you, one to one, one to many, it's still screen time. It's thinking through all these big pictures and details. How are you able to make space for yourself as a community leader when the need is getting higher? The attention to detail is even more needed. But how are you making sure you give yourself space as an innovator and as a leader to be able to support? Jen, would love to start with you and see what else Leo has to add too.
So I'm the one that's on the road right now that Monica mentioned. One of the things, and one of the ways I personally get energy and creativity is through traveling. I am not in this forest that you can see behind me, but I would like to be one day. So I've been actually leaning into, again, the sort of virtual world that we're in, and taking the time to live out a dream of traveling across the US in a car and being socially distant as I go. But one of the things that I'm leaning into a lot is just making sure that I clarify boundaries as far as my time. I'm constantly looking back at my calendar and my obligations and going, okay, is this suitable to the downtime that I need? And I think one of the joys for me is, as I've gotten older, I just turned 30 last year. As I get older, I am more and more aware of what my physical limitations are and where my energy can extend to without going beyond my reach. There may be weeks like that where I extend myself a little too much, but then I try to rebound with potentially a longer weekend or some more time in the evening. So it's a little bit of a mix of things, but I think being outdoors and being able to say, okay, I know looking ahead 2 months from now, I'm going to need a break. Allowing yourself to do that is fantastic. And I was just a little bit of a plug. I was listening to an interview with Brad Feld, who was one of the co-founders of Techstars. And one of the things that he has done for like 20 plus years is he takes a week off every quarter with his wife. Like, no matter what's going on, they do that just to unplug. And I've been trying to lean into if that's possible for me and trying to do things like that myself. The interview that I'm referencing is his latest interview on the Tim Ferriss podcast.
That's such a powerful reminder. And we have a fan here, Grant Carlos, saying that Jen is amazing at connecting folks and facilitating community. We absolutely agree. And I would say to do that, Jen needs to rest. And so I am glad you're able to treat yourself and share examples of how you do it, as well as the example of what Brad does at Techstars. Leo, I would love to hear how you do it as well. I mean, already the dots of all the global connections you're making for them is one thing, but how are you able to stay creative and sane in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think post-COVID, I think that boundaries word is really important. I think it's like such a blurry, I think you've heard millions of people talk about this, like it's so blurry, like when your day ends and like your work day ends and your like personal day starts, and like even like screen time is such an interesting thing. Like you go from like a Zoom screen to binging like a Netflix show, and like that's not always like a healthy output. So for me, it's been sort of really getting out, like taking intentional breaks. I think with the sort of, I think more flexibility actually is an interesting one. Like I try to take a midday break sometimes and go outside. I try to like intentionally have some outdoor time every day. And then, yeah, I think it's like a good balance, like finding what works for you and what kind of keeps you sort of motivated. I think like when this all started, we were sort of planning in like 2 to 3 month spurts. And I think now we're starting to realize that like, in some ways, like uncertainty is sort of something you can embrace. And I think as like someone who's worked with entrepreneurs, I think that comes naturally in some ways, but it's not always natural to everyone. So for me, it's been, instead of like long, like week-long spurts of vacation, I actually prefer like the long weekend. So like at the end of this week, I'm going for 2 days to Vermont. Next week, I'm taking a couple days to fish. Like I'm just finding those ways to sort of recharge the battery is really important to me. And yeah, and I think like in some ways, like the community work can be even more draining, right? Because I think there's a need now to be like, again, like when you're doing this work, you used to spend a lot of time thinking about like logistics, like is the food there? Do we have a space? And now a lot more of it is like in creating that intentional sort of connection with people and like facilitating and drawing people out and making sure that folks are engaged. I think that work is like in some ways mentally harder. And so for me, finding those breaks, especially outdoors, has been really important.
Thank you for highlighting that. And I'm glad as you as well are taking space for nature. Nature is becoming our best new friend. And if it has not been, we are getting to appreciate certainly more. Leo, you actually alluded at the last bit something that I did wanted to dig a little bit deeper, which is the opportunity of, being realizing that community leaders do play multiple roles. And as you have alluded, I think if you are organizing, whether it's hackathon events or boot camps or all these programs that they have both expressed, as a host, you often think through, okay, where's the location, the food, how are people showing up? Yes, that's not there. And we think about the technical piece, but as you said, the bigger piece is now emotionally, how are you providing that? And so we'd love to dig a little bit deeper. I mean, Jen, tell me a little bit more. What does that mean for you, for instance, specifically on how do you make sure then, for the entrepreneurs to feel inspired and motivated and not be discouraged at this time when they know that their industry, I mean, especially with your accelerator program, you have a wide range of audience in certain industry, they're seeing a plummet and a complete change. How are you finding ways to encourage them a little bit more and not be discouraged? And what are some new shifts in skills that you're seeing that it's needed for community leaders like yourself at this time?
Yeah, I think the one thing that comes to my mind immediately is when you say, how do we make sure that we have the most value, we're adding the most value to these founders. To me, it's really about making sure that whatever it is that we're asking them to spend time on matters in that moment. And so if I rewind the clock to what feels like a century ago, but was really just a few months ago, to mid-March, we were doing that flip like many programs were and many organizations and startups were to virtual. And we had a hard look at our schedule ahead of us and said, what if these things actually no longer matter? Or if they do matter, what is the thing that we can talk about that is related to this moment, which is so unique and so unprecedented? So I think for us, it's been what is happening right now. We have like that pulse on what's going on and staying on top of things, making sure that we're listening. I think listening is super important. I am very anti making programming in a silo. So even for Techstars right now, we're looking at putting together, Techstars Boston, I should say, we're looking to put together, a session at the end of August. We built out what we thought was a great sort of run of show for our events. And then we brought together our founders and our investors and our mentors in a brainstorming session. And we said, tell us what you like, what you don't like, what's valuable, what's not valuable. Just let us know and help us get inside of your brains right now, because we don't want to just put this together for our sake. We never do. So being very founder first has been super, super important. And then having that pulse on like what's happening right now. How can we respond?
Thinking about the value, not assuming that we have the answers, and asking the direct audience, what do you actually need? Wow. I mean, thank you, Jen, for those crystal reminders. Leo, what else should we be looking at? And perhaps what skills, even more so, that you would want community leaders to have, especially knowing that, as you said, uncertainty, we're going to keep seeing more.
Yeah, I think some of the things we encourage our early stage entrepreneurs to think about is sort of like experimentation and like creating a safe space to sort of fail or not succeed, but then kind of learn from that and grow, and then sort of like get back up. And in some ways, like I think as a team at the iLab, we've embraced that. Like we've sort of said, okay, like the things that like would make an event or other thing, as Jen said, or other kind of community function work don't necessarily apply as much anymore. And so let's as a team like test and experiment with new formats, new types of events, new types of connections. And we've really like embraced the idea of like bringing our sort of users on that journey with us. And so we've always had like a really active culture of feedback and like a two-way street. But even more so today, like we sort of, we test new things, we bring them up online really fast, we solicit a ton of feedback, and then we try to be analytical about like how we're measuring our success and then what we're doing more of, what we're doing less of. I think it's like on both ends. It's like in the upfront, as we're talking to our founders and our team, we sort of say, like, what are you interested in? What can we provide? And then we also think about, well, like as an entrepreneur, and especially like at the stage that our like audience is at, they might not actually know everything that they need. And so we try to balance for those two things. And then on the back end, once we sort of launch and deploy new things, we really, really focus on like measurement. So we survey them, we get informal feedback. So one sort of like example of something we've done recently, programming wise. So we found that like attention span is like really, really difficult in this sort of setting. So we've actually tested like 15-minute, 30-minute, 60 and 90-minute increments for programming. What we found is like the sweet spot is like 15 to 30 minutes, because like at least our audience really wants to like focus on depth or get to a certain level of depth and get to a certain point of like asking questions. But when we start to go beyond like 30 to 45 minutes, what we start to see is just a fall off in attention and focus. I don't know about you, but like I have like I have two screens at all time. I have like my Slack messages going off, everything. So it's really natural for me to want to like sort of disengage. And so what we found is like if we can go like low on time, we can concentrate what we're working on and really distill that down. Our audience really, really respects that, and it works well for them.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, Jen, just to piggyback on that, is that a similar research you found in the length of time of engagement, some of the programming? What are some things that you've noticed?
Yes. So I would say in the context of accelerators that the time tends to be like the shorter, the better, unless it's something like a CEO roundtable, which usually need at least 60 minutes to unpack everything in those types of sessions. But yeah, regarding workshops or anything of that nature, shorter is better. And then what I like to do is pair it with office hours. And I know Leo does that too. And so you get that initial content delivered, and then you say, great, let's stop here while we still have your attention. And let's break out. And if you want to continue like allowing people to do that one-on-one, they may or may not do it, but it gives them sort of the option to choose and decide how to proceed. So that's been really helping quite a lot. I know for Startup Weekend, so Startup Weekend has had quite an evolution. So the Techstars Startup Weekend program, which is that 3-day program, starts on a Friday night, wraps up on a Sunday. You go from idea all the way through building a team, prototyping, getting customer validation, and then crafting a pitch and then delivering that pitch. That has seen quite a evolution, I would say, in the last few months, because we've taken that program online. And it's become this self-service model, which is super interesting. So we're building out these playbooks that can be used by organizers all over the place. And then they can add on their own personal sort of flair or sessions that they would like to. And I just wanted to share that like the Startup Weekend edition, the Unite to Fight COVID-19 edition did end up taking place over in 55 countries with over 16,000 attendees across the world. As far as I know, it's one of the highest as far as attendance is concerned. And so I wanted to circle back on something that you had said, Monica, which is about what is the right amount of people involved and the timing too. So these are folks who want to contribute. They want to help with solving something COVID related in their country, at least in this particular setup. And those sessions were still happening over 3 days, right? And so they might be broken up into smaller chunks with the full group, but then you're using different types of tools like Discord so that you can continue to connect, but it doesn't always look like a constant, Zoom meeting as a big audience. You're breaking out into your smaller teams and working. So I would just say like the sky is kind of the limit right now. And this is the time for sure to experiment and break things. Like there are, a lot of us know what we're doing. We've run virtual programs before, but a lot of us are also trying things out, and it's totally okay. Like this is the time to lean into things you've never done before.
And I mean, like I said, right now we have even our chat engagement going on YouTube as we were speaking. And one of the things is just a reminder about how important it is, I think, not only, as both of you said, have that feedback loop of awareness, but I think I would say, to give you both also credit, to recognize it's not having the feedback loop in the structure, it's also knowing where to get the right information, like asking the right questions, because we say feedback loop, but like how many actually are asking the right questions, using it in a thoughtful way, and actually then confirming that feedback loop. And so just to relude, Grant also asked some follow-up questions on that conversation, and Leo would love if you have some starting thoughts to share, which is, he said, share with us a little bit more details on the process of how you ask and cultivate feedback. And I think in the programming, Faye on the chat commented about the software used for that is tough to navigate though. But I'm curious, like, what are ways that you can share a little bit more about the processes and cultivating feedback loop and metrics, how to then start with those metrics? My instinct feels that it's really going back to the keyword that we said is intentionality. But whether it's the software or like, how you go about it, I'll be curious to learn a little bit more. What's an important aspect in that process of measurement and actually asking the right questions to get the right information for as a leader?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So I think it's like, for me, it's two phases. It's like in the like planning stages, like we have like open office hours with our teams every week. And we're like regularly interacting with them to make sure that they're getting what they need, they feel supported. And we're sort of able to we have actually an entire advising team that's just focused on sort of student meetings and venture meetings and support. And so when we go into sort of the planning phases on a new initiative, we'd solicit a lot of feedback there. We sort of like, first of all, like we sort of try and just centralize and think about what are we hearing from sort of our teams and what do they need. And we have sort of a weekly meeting where we sort of kind of bring those things to the forefront as a sort of a program team. And then on one-offs, sort of like when I'm thinking, those, like we were thinking about those 15-minute talks, I always reserve like 5 minutes or so at the end of a meeting to just sort of pick a team's brain and just sort of say like, I think this session would be interesting for you. Tell me about like what you would want to get out of something like that. How much, like what would be valuable to you? What would not feel as valuable? And I take that into account in like both a formal and informal way as I start to plan the session. And then on the back end, we measure a couple of sort of different sort of stats from our community. So we always take an NPS score. It's not a perfect measure of satisfaction, and it's like somewhat cultural and other things, but I think as a starting place, it's really, really good. And we do measure like our pre and post kind of COVID NPS numbers for some of our sessions and programs and other things. The other thing that I think about is like sort of value. So value is a big one on my end. Like how much value are they getting out of an event? I usually just put that on a 5 to 7 point scale. And the last thing I try to measure or try to take is actually just like qualitative feedback as much as possible. So we asked them to sort of tell us one thing that they like enjoyed about an event and one thing that we could improve, or one thing that they didn't enjoy as much. And like you start to see the signals come through. Like you start to see some sort of patterns that say like this worked, this didn't. And it's super helpful to us as sort of we like reassess the engagement over time. So that's kind of how we measure. I mean, I can talk a little bit more specifically about tools and other things, but you could pretty much do that with any survey tool like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or even Google Forms.
And again, as you know, Leo, you're highlighting, it's really the intentionality and the thought process, right? As you said, the how, it matters less when the why is clear. The intention of why you're doing the survey and what you're planning to use it. Jen, I want to follow up on, you know, kind of Leo's building on that. I'm sure you have different ways of how you navigate, but I would love if you can share insight, particularly into this, which is, are you seeing any difference in how people are responding back to those feedback loop versus in person versus online? Because I feel like, you know, yes, it's one thing to collect all these insights and figure out how you iterate, but I'm curious, like, are people more just excited to share more because of where the online engagement is, or has it become harder? And if so, what are different ways that you're needing to go after and collect these insights?
Yeah. So I haven't seen a huge, it's a good question I haven't reflected on at all, Monica, which is, has it changed since pre-COVID, let's say? I don't think it has. If anything, like email got kind of quiet for a couple months. I think while everyone was figuring out what the heck was going on. But otherwise, I think it's pretty much the same. I've had the same, almost the exact same experience over the last few years needing to collect feedback. One of the things I love to do, which I think is powerful, is ask people when you're in a meeting with them. So I like to ask for feedback when I have all eyes on us. Like we do a weekly, during our accelerator program, we do a weekly all hands meeting, and I know that everyone is there. And so I'll ask for, you know, we collect feedback 3 times during that program. We collect feedback after every mentor session and every workshop too, but we collect feedback on the overarching, like, how is the program going 3 times, in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, so that we can sort of tweak as we go. But what I really like to do is put up a bit.ly link and ask in person and say, we're going to pause for 5 minutes, and I want everybody to go in right now and do this. I know how busy you are outside of these meetings, and I don't want to have to email you 300 times to get the answers that I need in order to make this program better for you. And so we'll literally just take a pause and have everybody do that. And I find that that works so much better than if I just email them only. So that helps quite a lot. The other thing that I was going to say is, if you're thinking about internal retrospectives and feedback collection, one of the tools that the Techstars team has started using, and I think is fantastic, is called Parable. It's a way to, in real time, set up like an interactive retro, and you can have a really nice conversation and sort of see how things get bucketed into different sort of ideas or categories, and take that discussion forward. So I found that that works really, really well for internal discussions. And then the last thing I'll say is, you don't need to have the fanciest surveying tool in the world. You really don't. You can use Google Forms. You can use, Typeform is great just from like an aesthetic perspective and how much customization you can do if you can pay for it. But other things too, like Leo alluded to, like SurveyMonkey, can work. So keep it simple and meet people where they are, and hopefully you'll yield the responses that you're looking for.
Your last comment really, I mean, it's an echo again. At the end of the day, we need to make it accessible for the people. Like, who is this for in the first place, right? Whether getting feedback or creating these programs or asking people to show up. I want to take a step back. I mean, we kind of went into the whole spectrum realm of like, okay, how programs have shifted. How do you take care of yourself as a leader? How do you take feedback loop? But, I want to loop back to one thing that both of you said, which is, hey, this is how we responded back in March. This is where we are now. And let's be honest, right now, this could be another phase where we're going to say, at that time in, what is it? Today is July 27th. So back in July 27th, this is what we thought, but this is where we are now in December. So one of the things I am curious is, I mean, yes, pandemic is new, but both of you have seen a lot of changes in the work that you've done, and have come across where you've had to constantly iterate. So having seen the changes we've gone through so far, what are things that should be looking out for as a community leader, especially if we're running programs like this and really want to be intentional? What are maybe new skills, new kind of intentionality in the way we build our programs, so that way we're not, again, just reacting, but actually being proactive? So we'd love, maybe Leo, if you would be able to start, and then go into Jen.
Yeah, sure. I think two things that I'm thinking a lot about today are that I think there's, I think we've been sort of in like sustaining mode so far. Like, how do we, in some ways, like, how do we shift? Like, as you said, like, how do we shift? Like, how do we move things over? Like, how do we kind of immediately react to things? And I think relationships are in a similar boat, right? Which is like, sustaining a connection in this world is easy, or not easy, but like easier than actually creating new connections. Like, those sort of moments where like you meet a person by hanging out after an event, or going to a networking event, or like, those things are just harder in this world because we're sort of behind screens. And so for me, like, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about over the next sort of 3-6 months is, how do we build sort of these types of connections in a virtual world, and do it sort of intentionally, and sort of in a way that sort of still kind of captures that sort of serendipity that we don't experience always. And so that's one piece for me. And the other piece, I think, is like, again, instead of reacting, like really thinking through like what the like long-term sort of value we have. Like, so sort of keeping nothing sacred, but really thinking about, like, as we move into the next sort of 3-6 months, like, how do we sort of continue to offer not only sort of like things that are responsive to like the moment we're in now, but sort of continue to sort of support our entrepreneurs and innovators in a way that's will sustain them for the entire sort of future.
I love that key kind of reminder that, hey, this is not a few weeks. Think 3 to 6 months at least, or maybe a few years, because this is not just going to be a few week deal. And I think that's so incredibly invaluable. Thank you for reminding us on the meaningfulness. Jen, what about for you?
Yeah, and I apologize. I think there's a vacuum going on and behind me. So we'll roll with it. So a couple of things that come to mind for me are, yes, this is a long-term shift that we're going to see, right? And so how do we lean into the virtual side of this? I think from the community builder, program manager sort of perspective, I am 100,000% leaning into, what facilitation skills do I need? What do I already know how to do that translates? What do I need to know how to do better? How do I create material that can be easily accessible over the internet? What tools do I not use, but I could use to facilitate different types of discussions? One of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is get off of Zoom every once in a while. And so it's okay to go experiment with tools. One of the things that Leo had mentioned is this idea of, how do you create serendipity? And one of the tools that I really like is called icebreaker.video. So I love it. If anyone ever puts an event on and they're using that tool, I want to be there just because it's so much fun. Basically, you can have as many people as you want join in. You can randomly assign people to meet each other, and you can give them a set of prompts in order to meet one another and talk about their childhood, or talk about their business, or XYZ. But I found that to be super fun and useful. So I think learning tools, knowing how to use them, being able to, if you want to have a brainstorming session, being able to whiteboard, virtually whiteboard. If you're going to try to host a session that feels like a conference, using something like Remo. If you need something, like there's a tool out there for you. So I would explore as much as you can. And if you're looking for a resource, there is a longtime startup weekend community leader named Felix Wong, who put together this repository of all the tools that you can look into. And it's called virtualmojito.com. So if you go there, it'll showcase really like hundreds of the top tools that you can look into, find out the pricing, all of that. So I know I'm going down the tools track. I can sort of shift back and say, first, set the intention, right? And so what I'm doing right now is, as I lean into and get ready for the next accelerator program that we lead in November, I'm thinking about the different styles of meetings we're going to have and figuring that out first. I'm not trying to pick the tool and then match it back, because then you get stuck in this sort of strange, back and forth of it doesn't fit what I need. First, set your goals and intentions of your session, whatever that is, and then go find the right tool that can help you make that possible in the best way possible.
Thank you for so many nuggets of reminders. Leo, I know you wanted to add a few more as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think going off what Jen said, I think like there's, for us, like we're sort of in this sort of continued sort of moment where it's like we're starting new programs, but we're, in some cases, some of our audience is the same. I think we're taking the fall intentionally to sort of reset norms and expectations. So I think like when we were in March, we were like, okay, like what do we do quickly to pivot? I think going into the fall, we're sort of like, this is sort of our steady state for a little bit. And so how do we take a moment at the start of like a session or a program or anything else to sort of set some expectations for how we like work together as a community, how we interact with each other, and how we support each other? I think that's like a really important thing, and it's going to vary and depend extremely on like the size of your audience and all these sort of things we've been talking about today. But just like that moment for, as a like, if you're a facilitator or just like part of a community, to just say like, hey, like how do we like as a group strive for something bigger and better than the sort of sum of our parts, is really, really important.
I want to add one other thing to that, Leo. That was so critical to say, which is setting your like community norms or expectations is key. And so one of the things that we did when we pivoted is we had sort of a list of guidelines or etiquette to how do you participate effectively. So video on, be on mute unless you're going to speak. There are little things that just help set the tone for how to make the most out of those sessions. Don't have other screens up. Like there might be other things that you want to add into that flow. But I agree, that's really, really important.
And I love that these are small details that I think often it's like, oh, those are just like, the long terms of agreement. Okay, I'm just going to click okay, I approve it. Like we have a lot of statements where I think we just say by passing, but what you're saying is that that's actually the rock foundation. Because things are changing so fast, because we know there is so much uncertainty, when the ground is not on firm basis, what the norm is, what the intentions are, why are we here in the first place, then the tool doesn't matter, because the intentionality and why we're here together is crystal clear. And so I appreciate you not only in how you walked your talk and how you've done in the past few months. Thank you. I'm sure many of your communities hugely are in depth in gratitude. And I appreciate you sharing that wisdom with all of us as innovators are watching in, whether now or later on when they rewatch this. And we're going to remember the lessons, especially thinking about this is what we thought in July. We'll come back in a few months and see, man, thank God we set that perspective in mind as we think about the uncertainty and changes ahead. So with that being said, I mean, time is flying before we realize we are almost at the end of it, and time flies when we're having fun. As we wrap up, this is one of the things I often ask, and so I know some folks always probably scroll back to the very last bit because they know I asked this, which is, what is the final piece of advice that you would like to share with innovators around the world and how they can be a better community leader, or maybe kind of guiding and really thinking more proactive actions at this time? And so we'll love, Jen, if maybe we can start with you. What is a single piece of advice? If they forget everything that we talked about, what is at least one thing they should absolutely do? And then after that, Leo.
This is too hard. I have two things, but I'll combine them and make a really long run-on sentence for you. So my two things are, one, I would just remember I don't know whose quote this is, maybe you do, but it's like the best artists steal. So one of the where I'm going with this is you can look out there and see, once you have sort of an idea of what you want to put together, go out and find some examples or ways that are going to inspire you, and see how that may inform making your event, your program, that much better. And so I'm a huge believer in don't reinvent the wheel if you can. There are really intelligent people that want to help, that want to contribute to your success. And so the other part of my long run-on sentence and advice is ask. Make the ask. Email someone if you're really inspired by their work. Ask if you could jump on a call to learn more about how they put together their programming. You'll be surprised how many people will say yes and will want to jump on a call with you to make sure that you're able to succeed as well. So those are my couple of pieces of advice to leave you with. And thanks for having me here today.
Those are all, I would +1 to all of those. I have personally written down icebreaker.video here because I hadn't heard of it before. So I'm very excited to check that out after. I would just maybe add one thing that's on my end, which I think we've sort of touched in different ways throughout the session, but it's listen. I think it's it's so easy to sort of just pile on these days, the torrent of blog posts and other things that are just going on, podcasts, other everything. But what's really important is to understand your customer and your audience, and then listen to what they want and how you can add value, and kind of use that as sort of the framing objective throughout. I think that's the most important thing you can do. And I think it's one of the things that's kind of been profoundly helpful for us as we've built our programs. Without that, you don't have sort of an anchor to kind of guide you and do sort of the core things that are important to them.
And I would say, to build on all of that, keep iterating, because we do not know where the wind will flow, literally. And, just seeing how much has changed since March. I know many said, oh, we're going to get back in the office by summer. It's going to be okay. But let's plan for the long run and be prepared of all the scenarios. And I think that's being a true, long-term thinking leader, of knowing that we really, truly don't know. And how do we use that as an opportunity to innovate and hence be prepared of all the different scenarios and take the courage to do so. And so, a deep gratitude again. Thank you both very much. Super honored and pleased to have you. For those again joining us live, I'm super excited that you're here. Just a few reminders again. Today, in fact, is special because this will be the last episode I will be doing for season 1. You didn't know there was season 1, but now you do. This is season 1 because I am also going to be taking a self-care break. So we will be back again in the fall, likely mid-September, October, to kick back the creativity shows on Mondays. And so stay tuned. But for the time being, what I hope you all get to join is our Global Innovators Summit. So I put the link in the chat box again. It's bit.ly/2020 Innovators Global Summit. And that will be an awesome opportunity where you'll be able to not only meet amazing folks like these, but also really getting a chance on meaningful relationship building. Because what we found, going back to the listening, is you don't want to just hear lectures, you want to actually talk to one another. And so that's a space that, in addition to learning, you will get a chance to meet other innovators and have a deeper conversation. So it's August 8th, coming up very soon. The live streaming is a free part you can join for those who want to just tune in, but for active participants, you can be part of the group. And so that's coming up. I'll share more information. But with that being said, thank you very much, Jen and Leo. We are super delighted. Thank you all joining live, and we will see you again, hopefully August 8th, if not very soon, but you can just rewatch the videos in the time being. So with that being said, have a wonderful summer, and we will see you